What is something about yourself that sounds totally made up, but is 100% real? I built a 13-foot tall T-Rex with Christopher Walken's head, and New York Magazine called it highbrow and brilliant. My dad's name is Luigi and my uncle's name is Mario. They are brothers. Eater, I forgot to add that my dad is also a plumber. I died first, and then was born. I've told this story a few times on Reddit, but I enjoy telling it, so here we go again. During the cesarean to bring me into the world, there was some major complication on my mother's end. She started bleeding internally, drowning me in the womb. When I was removed, the doctors tried to get me breathing but couldn't. I was declared dead. My mother was still unconscious, but my dad was brought in to say goodbye to me. He held me in his arms, was saying goodbye when out of nowhere I started coughing up blood and screaming as babies do. Apparently it was the weirdest moment in his life, being abjectly terrified and overwhelmed with joy that I was alive. It's my favorite story to tell, because weirdly it takes some pressures off on birthdays. I don't do well with too much attention by family, friends, but celebrating my death day doesn't bring people the same connotations. I grew up on the wrong side of the river, was considered by all to be the town loser, and went to work as a janitor while still in high school. Then, in my 40s I set a goal for myself, while still working full time, to take one class at a time until I either graduate or die, whichever comes first. At age 49 I finished my Bachelor's of Science degree, at age 52 my MBA, and age 61 my PhD. Never let the arrogant elitists define who you are or what you can be. My great-grandma ran a brothel back at the turn of the 20th century. She was Algonquin and people were pretty racist back then, so she had a hard time getting business. Since it was a coastal town, Maine, she bought up a couple leaky old row boats and would load them up with hookers and booze and row them out to the ships at night. When ships came in to port, most of the crew would get shore leave and hit the bars and brothels in town, but they always had to leave a few sailors on the ship to keep an eye on it. My great-grandmother figured those guys had money too and probably felt left out. She basically set up water-based lot lizards, or Uber hoes. My grandpa and his sisters grew up in the brothel and no one would talk to them or socialize with them. My grandpa met my grandma picking green beans for a local farmer. They fell in love. When they wanted to get married they had to leave the state to get away from her family that were utterly disgusted that she would marry the son of a whore. So they ran off to Detroit because GM was hiring, and that's how my family came to Michigan. I never graduated high school, but I have a bachelor's degree. I was homeschooled and my mom never went through the legal steps to actually get me a real diploma. So she made one in Photoshop that was then used to get me into this podunk community college that didn't verify it. From there I got my associate's degree, which I then used to get into a decent university, where I got my bachelor's. I'm allergic to lettuce. Like I carry an EpiPen allergic. I was once sponsored by the Crunk Energy Drink Company for sailing. I imagine I was the only sailor on their list. I literally just emailed them saying that I sailed and asked if they wanted me to put stickers on my boat. They sent me a few cases of the drink, t-shirts, hats, the works. My car was known as the Crunk Mobile. My great-grandfather worked in the textile business and started importing rayon fabric from Japan in the late 60s and 70s. Keep in mind this was during the early days of synthetic fabrics, and traveling to Japan was not all that common. On a business trip, he met some Japanese businessmen who were selling newly designed transistor radios. His contacts wanted to set up an exclusive import agreement for their electronics to North America, but my great-grandfather declined. Because how many of these radios could you possibly sell? Turns out that was a short-sighted business decision. Because that company was called Sony Electronics, he turned down the exclusive import contract for Sony. On the other side of my family, My Canadian relatives walked away from 100 acres of land in Alberta during the Dust Bowl and Great Depression. They decided it was not worth paying the taxes on their land. Turns out that land was right in the heart of the Alberta oil deposits. Also on my mother's side of the family, they used to have a citrus orchard near Los Angeles. They sold it cheap to some land developers. That farm was right at Hollywood and Vine. My family on both sides is bad at seeing long-term investments. I was at a store when Tony Hawk was signing autographs. I was only 10 at the time and was a huge fan. One of his early video games had just come out. The store had a couple TVs on the wall and some video games to play. Being a kid, I waited for one controller to open up and someone leave. A kid ended up leaving and I grabbed the controller and started playing and minding my own business. A couple minutes later the store wanted to grab photos of Tony playing his own video game. He came over and grabbed the second controller and began to play multiplayer with me. Probably played for 10 minutes. The bonus was it was also my 10th birthday. So I played Tony Hawk Pro Skater with Tony Hawk. Edit. Wow, I made this comment and didn't return to Reddit until just now. Was not expecting it to be that big of a hit. Thank you. I do not have photos of myself playing the game with him, but I believe my parents have a couple of photos of me with him and getting his autograph. I still have the signboard on my wall. I took my mother for a surprise trip to Nick. She got married to my father there in '68. The surprise was manufactured by way of telling her we were going to Australia. We live in New Zealand. So a trip to Australia is not a huge deal. It's the type of thing you could do for the weekend. And therefore she packed a bag and brought her passport. We got to the airport and said surprise. We are going to New York. And she cried her eyes out with delight. When we arrived on our first morning, I said, okay, what do you want to do? She said, when I was last here in 1968, the Twin Towers weren't complete. So I'd like to go to the top of them. Your wish is my command. I said, and off we went to the WTC. That was the afternoon of September 10th, 2001. Suffice it to say, there was a particular poignancy when we looked out the window at around 8 AM the next morning. In Minnesota in the 70s, I was 16 taking my driver's test, nervous as hell. A highway patrol officer was the road tester back then, which was even more nerve-wracking. But I thought I was doing pretty good the whole time because I had lots of practice with my parents. Then towards the end of the driving test, I was at a T intersection across from a hospital. I was hesitant to turn onto the road because traffic was busy. I could tell the officer was getting a little impatient, but he was nicely telling me to be a little aggressive. Suddenly at the hospital across from us, someone pushed out a screen from a window on the 3rd floor, psych ward. A woman jumped out the window onto a garage roof underneath, then jumped to the ground and ran across the road right by us. The officer had me turn around. I was in my mum's car and chase the girl in the neighborhood. When I would pull up to a stop sign during the chase, he would say, go go go. Just go through it. After a while, when she started to get away, he gave up with me being the chase driver and told me to head back to the DMV office. I was a complete shaking mess at this point, ready to accept the fact I would not get a license anytime soon. Devastating for a 16-year-old boy. He grabbed my score sheet, said you passed, and handed it to me. I got an 88 score. He ran to his HW patrol car and tore off to continue the chase. I go in the office a complete mess. My mom was already really nervous because we were gone so long. Then she saw me looking like a ghost. She said, what happened? Told her I passed. Then told her the story on the way home. She wasn't amused and pretty pissed at the highway patrol guy. When I tell the story, I say no BS. Just ask my mom. I saw the former Prime Minister of Poland in his underwear. Once in college I applied for a job at the library help desk. I figured I would help people find books. Didn't give it much more thought than that. During the interview, I aced all of the customer service questions. Then they asked me whether I knew how to defrag a hard drive. Cue alarm bells in my head. But I kept calm outwardly and said no. But you can teach me. I worked in it for 3 years by accident. They were too nice to fire me. I found out my father wasn't my biological father in 10th grade biology class. We were learning about blood types and trays. I raised my hand thinking I was a smartass. Your chart isn't accurate. My dad has AB negative, and I'm O positive. My teacher said I think your mom has some explaining to do. And we all chuckled. Turned out, he was not my father. A horse threw me in the air when I was a child. But I wasn't on his back. He grabbed the skin of my back with his teeth and yeeted me. My husband, I'm 30, has been my best friend since I was 7. He was the new kid at school and I walked up to him and said, "We are going to be best friends." He said, "No we aren't. Leave me alone." I bugged him every day for 2 weeks before he finally said, "If I'll be your friend, will you shut up about it?" We were married 20 years later. Proved his ass wrong. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell for more Reddit content.